Pick it up, boy. That $20 is more than your kind earns using their brains. Preston, please. He's just a child. A child? Marissa, your son has been staring at my $50,000 chessboard long enough. Maybe he thinks it's part of the buffet. Careful, Preston. Maybe the boy actually plays. Plays? Fine. One game. He beats me. I write him a check for $1 million. He loses. He and his mother pack their things, walk out of this house, and never come back. Mr. Carlyle, sir, I'm begging you, please. Mom, it's okay. You hear that, everyone? The housekeeper's boy accepts. Somebody set up the board. This won't take long. You're right, sir. It won't. 9 moves later, the man laughing the loudest would lose far more than a chess game. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been laughed at by someone who had no idea who you really were? To understand what happened in that ballroom, you have to go back past the party, but the bet, and into the world that shaped Micah Bennett. Greenwich, Connecticut. The Carlyle estate spread behind iron gates at the end of a private road. 12 bedrooms, a ballroom, a garage filled with expensive cars that were almost never driven. Preston Carlyle was 56 years old. He had built a $4 billion hedge fund by reading people, finding weakness, and pressing exactly where it hurt. Wall Street called him a shark. He considered it a compliment. But money was never really the point for Preston. Power was. He collected things other men wanted. Paintings, vintage watches, rare cars, influence, and sometimes people. He liked having an audience when he won. More than liked it. I needed it. Guests at his parties learned to laugh at his jokes before they were even sure the joke was funny, the way employees laugh when the man telling the joke also signs their checks. And moving quietly through all that marble and money was a woman named Marissa Bennett. Marissa had kept the Carlyle house running for years. She traveled in from Bridgeport before most of the city was awake. She cleaned 12 bedrooms that were barely used. She polished silver no one needed. She carried laundry through halls wider than her entire apartment. Then she rode home exhausted. Her hands were cracked from bleach. Her back hurt in ways she rarely mentioned. Marissa was 41 years old, and she had spent much of her life being invisible to wealthy people. Preston almost never called her by name. He called her the help. If something went missing, Marissa was questioned first. When nothing had been stolen, no one apologized. She endured it. Not because she lacked pride, because pride did not pay the rent in Bridgeport, and her son needed school books, bus fare, and a future. Once, a guest knocked a wine glass from the terrace. Preston charged Marissa for it. The money came out of her paycheck without a conversation. She discovered it only when she checked her account. She returned to work anyway, because the job was the plan. And the plan was Micah. Micah Bennett was 14 years old, tall for his age. Thin as a fence post, eyes that noticed everything, a mouth that said very little. After school, he took 2 buses to the estate and waited in the kitchen until his mother finished working. The house rules were simple. Stay in the corner, stay quiet, touch nothing. So Micah sat on a stool near the pantry with a library book and made himself small. He earned straight A's at Bridgeport East. One teacher once wrote Marissa a note saying her son had a remarkable mind. Marissa framed that note. It hung in their apartment beside a photograph of an older man sitting at a chess table in a public park. Remember that photograph. It matters. Now, about the chessboard. It sat in Preston Carlyle's study beneath a brass gallery lamp. Walnut and maple, hand-carved pieces imported from Vienna. Worth $50,000. Beside it hung a framed newspaper clipping, yellowed around the edges. The clipping read, Yale Jr. takes intercollegiate chess crown. Preston had been 20 years old in the photograph, smirking over the trophy. Decades had passed. The smirk had not. Chess remained Preston's favorite weapon. At dinner parties, he offered games to guests brave enough to sit across from him. Then, he dismantled them while explaining their mistakes out loud. You see what he did there? That's how people lose money with me too. Then came the line he loved most. I would raise his glass and say it as if the room had been waiting for scripture. No one in this house has ever beaten me. No one ever will. The guests would chuckle and look toward the floor. Nobody challenged him. Winning against Preston Carlisle could be bad for business. Losing to him was simply part of being invited. Everyone around him understood the rule. Let Preston win. Then, one evening, something small happened in the study. Something nobody was supposed to notice. Marissa was cleaning the upstairs hall. Micah had been asked to carry a tray of glasses past the study. I had not volunteered. A caterer had simply handed it to him, as if the boy were part of the staff. As Micah passed the open door, he stopped. The display board was arranged in the middle of a famous championship position. Except it was wrong. One white knight sat a single square away from where it belonged. One square, that was all. But that one square broke the entire logic of the position. Micah knew that position, the way other kids knew song lyrics. He set down the tray. He looked over his shoulder. Then he reached out and moved the knight one square to the left. A soft click of wood against wood, and suddenly the board made sense again. Interesting. A voice came from behind him. Micah turned. A silver-haired man stood in the doorway, holding a glass of club soda. Calm eyes, a quiet gray suit. The kind of man whose clothes were expensive without needing to announce it. Micah froze. His heart started pounding. An apology was already forming in his head. But the stranger only looked at the corrected knight. Then he looked at Micah. The way a jeweler looks at a stone, everyone else walked past. Most people get that knight wrong, the man said quietly. You didn't. Micah grabbed the tray and left before the stranger could say anything else. He never caught the man's name. I would hear it soon enough. And the next time, it would be spoken with great respect in a room full of people who had shown none to him. Later, in the kitchen, Marissa took one look at her son's face and knew something had happened. You touched something, she said. It was not really a question. Micah started explaining. The knight, the square, the broken position. Marissa cut him off with a look she had perfected through years inside that house. Baby, listen to me. In this house, we don't correct rich men. We don't get noticed. Head down, hands to yourself. Then we get home safe. You hear me? Yes, ma'am. Micah meant it. I had no plan to be noticed by anybody in the Carlisle house. I wanted to read his book, wait for his mother, and disappear. But later, invitations went out. Heavy cream cardstock, gold lettering. Carlisle Capital had crossed $4 billion under management, and Preston Carlisle was throwing a party large enough to make sure every important person along the eastern seaboard heard about it. 200 guests, senators, fund managers, business leaders, a celebrity chef brought in from Manhattan. The estate filled with strangers. Florists stacked white roses toward the ceiling. Workers strung lights across the lawn until the grounds looked covered in fallen stars. And through it all, Preston walked the halls practicing his toast. He paused at the study often to admire the chessboard, the old clipping, and the younger version of himself, smiling above the trophy. A king checking his crown. Marissa was told to work an extended shift. That meant Micah had nowhere else to go. He would spend the party in the kitchen, on his usual stool, keeping his head down. For a while, the plan worked. Nobody noticed the boy in the kitchen. The ballroom glittered like a jewelry case. 200 of the wealthiest people on the East Coast drank champagne under 3 chandeliers while Preston floated between them, collecting congratulations like rent. Then the catering team ran short of hands. A manager pointed at Micah. Carry this. Go. So the boy, in second-hand sneakers, carried tray after tray through a room filled with tuxedos and evening gowns. Eyes down. Exactly the way his mother had taught him. It worked until he reached the study. The doors were open for the party. The $50,000 chessboard glowed beneath its lamp. Micah meant only to walk past. But the position he had corrected earlier was back on display. His feet stopped before his judgment could catch up. He studied it for only a moment. Then Preston's voice cut through the room like a fork striking glass. Well, look at this. Preston stood in the doorway with a group of guests behind him, scotch in one hand, a grin already loaded. The helps kid studying my board. You like that, boy? You know what it costs? More than your mother makes in a year. Laughter moved through the room. More guests drifted closer. They sensed entertainment. Behind them, Marissa appeared. Her face went pale. Preston reached into his pocket, pulled a $20 bill from his money clip, and tossed it toward Micah's feet. The bill spun through the air and settled on the marble. "Pick it up. That's more than your kind earns using their brains." Micah did not move. He looked at the bill, then at Preston, and said nothing. The silence stretched just long enough to make somebody uncomfortable. A guest in the crowd broke it. "Careful, Preston. Maybe the boy plays." That was all Preston needed. An audience, a victim, a stage. He set down his scotch and opened his arms like a ringmaster. "You know what? I'm feeling generous. One game. The kid beats me, undefeated in this house for years, and I write him a check for $1 million. He waited for the room to react. It did. A collective gasp moved through the crowd. Preston continued. "High loses. He and his mother pack their things and never set foot here again." "Mr. Carlyle, sir, please." Marissa pushed through the crowd. A tray had been abandoned somewhere behind her. Her voice shook. "He's 14. We don't want trouble. I'm begging you." "Then your boy should keep his eyes off my things." Micah looked at his mother, at her cracked hands twisting the edge of her apron, at all the swallowed insults living inside one trembling woman. Then he looked down at the $20 bill, lying on the marble like a dare. Inside his pocket, his fingers found a small wooden king. Its crown had been worn smooth by 2 generations of hands. "Okay," Micah said. "One game." The room erupted. Laughter. Applause. Someone called for the board. Marissa closed her eyes. Preston grinned. "You hear that, everyone? The housekeeper's boy accepts. This won't take long. I was right. He just had the winner wrong, because what nobody in that ballroom knew, not even the man holding the money clip, was where Micah had spent so many Saturdays of his childhood, or who had been waiting there to teach him. While the staff cleared a table in the center of the ballroom and the guests pressed closer for the show, Micah stood very still, and in his mind, he was a little boy again in a Harlem park, watching an old man set up a chessboard with hands like tree roots. Solomon Reed, Marissa's father. Everybody at the stone tables in Marcus Garvey Park simply called him Pops. For decades, Pops had been a legend almost nobody famous had heard of. He worked as a hotel doorman. Chess was his calling. On Saturdays, he sat at the stone tables and played anyone willing to sit across from him for $5 a game. College students, club players, tourists. Once, even a touring master who stopped smiling after 12 moves. Pops beat nearly everybody. Then he shook their hands. Sometimes he handed the money right back. He never played in an official rated tournament. Entry fees cost money, and money went to rent. To Marissa, later, to a grandson with watchful eyes. The chess world never learned his name. The park knew him. 2 Pops, that was enough. Micah was 5 years old when Pops first sat him in front of a board, while other children were learning cartoons. Micah learned that a knight moves like an L and thinks like a knife. Saturday after Saturday, Pops taught him openings the way other grandfathers taught fishing, patiently, with stories. He taught endgames on an old board with a missing pawn replaced by a bottle cap, and he taught one lesson more often than all the others. The board doesn't ask your color, son. It doesn't ask your zip code. It doesn't ask how much money your father has. 64 squares, same pieces for both sides. It's the fairest place I've ever found. When you sit down equal. By the time Micah was 11, he was beating almost everybody at the stone tables. Everybody except Pops. Then, one afternoon, the old man studied his grandson from across the board and saw something that brought light into his eyes. "You're better than me, boy," Pops said. "Don't tell anybody yet." Not long after that, Pop's heart began to fail. When he became too weak to return to the park, they placed the old board across his hospital blanket. He could barely lift the pieces. He played anyway. Partway through the game, Pops stopped. He picked up his white king, the one with the crown polished smooth by decades beneath his thumb. Then he folded it into Micah's palm. "Listen to me now," he whispered. "One day, somebody is going to look at you and see nothing but a poor black kid. They'll laugh before you ever touch a piece. Don't argue. Don't shout. Let the board speak. The board never lies." Pops died not long after. Micah was 11 years old. I did not cry at the funeral. Instead, he went to the park. He sat alone at the empty stone table and played both sides of his grandfather's favorite game until darkness settled over the city. After that, the game went underground. A donated laptop, free chess websites, a username that revealed almost nothing. Stone Table 11. Over the next few years, Micah played more than 10,000 games, often late at night with the screen dimmed low, so his mother would not notice the light beneath his bedroom door. He studied Grandmaster games the way preachers study scripture, move by move, again and again, until the patterns no longer lived on the screen. They lived in his hands. By 14, Stone Table 11 had climbed to a rating of 2,412, master territory. Strong club players avoided him. Micah had also developed a specialty, almost a signature. He hunted aggressive players, the ones who attacked too early, grabbed pawns, sent their queens racing across the board like bullies chasing lunch money. Micah had built a private collection of traps for exactly that kind of player. He could almost smell arrogance through a screen. Marissa never really knew. She saw the laptop and assumed schoolwork. Chess was the one secret Micah kept from her. Not because he was ashamed, because the game was the last room in the world where his grandfather still felt alive. Micah was not ready to share that room with anyone. Now he stood in a Greenwich ballroom, while strangers laughed at the housekeeper's son. Across from him sat a man worth $4 billion, cracking his knuckles over a $50,000 board. Micah pulled out the chair and sat down. Under the table, his thumb traced the smooth crown of the wooden king in his pocket. Somebody is going to look at you and see nothing but a poor black kid. Okay, Pops, Micah thought. Let's let the board speak. The table was moved beneath the largest chandelier. Preston insisted on it. If he was going to teach the helps kid a lesson, he wanted everybody to watch. 2 staff members carried the chessboard from the study with extraordinary care. Phones appeared everywhere, dozens of them, raised above shoulders, recording lights blinking like small red eyes. A hedge fund manager's nephew started a live stream. At first, 40 viewers watched, then 200, then more. Remember those phones. They matter. As Preston rolled up his sleeves, the silver-haired man in the quiet gray suit stepped out of the crowd. Preston, if there's money involved, you'll want a neutral referee. Preston's face brightened. Grant. Everyone, this is Grandmaster Grant Ellison. The real thing. One of the strongest players in the country in his day. Perfect. Now nobody can say, I didn't beat the boy fairly. Micah looked up. He recognized the calm eyes immediately. The man from the study. The one who had watched him correct the knight. Grant gave no sign that they had ever met. He simply stood beside the table. State the terms clearly, Preston, he said. For everyone here. Preston loved every syllable. $1 million to the boy if he wins. If he loses, he and his mother leave my employment and my property and never return. Witnessed, Grant said. And judging by the phones, recorded too. Preston sat down and turned the board. I play white. I always play white. He smirked at Micah. First lesson, free of charge. White moves first. That means I attack. You suffer. Micah said nothing. He centered his pieces one by one, exactly as Pops had taught him. Touch each soldier before the battle. Know where everyone lives. Then came the first move. Preston pushed his king's pawn forward 2 squares, hard enough to rattle the pieces behind it. The classic opening of a man announcing himself to the room. A few guests actually applauded. Micah answered before the applause had fully faded. Pawn against pawn. Center against center. The oldest answer in the book. Fast hands, Preston said. Fast hands lose fast games. Then came Preston's second move. The queen. He brought his most powerful piece into the open almost immediately. She moved toward Micah's king side, aiming at one of the weakest early squares around the black king. It was a bar fight of an opening, the beginning of the famous 4-move, checkmate, beginner's fear. One guest who knew chess leaned toward the person beside him. He's going for scholar's mate. He's trying to finish a child in 4 moves. Micah glanced at the queen. Then he did something small and unexpected. He smiled. Not at Preston, at the board. The way someone smiles at an old friend telling a joke he has heard 100 times. Micah developed his knight, calm as a doorman, defending the threat while claiming space in the center. Grant Ellison stopped watching the board for a moment. He started watching the boy. Grant had seen that response thousands of times, but rarely from amateurs. Beginners panic when a queen charges at them. They push pawns like sandbags. They scramble. Micah had not flinched. His knight did more than defend. It stepped into the center and quietly asked the queen a question. And now what? Preston developed his bishop. The piece aimed down a long diagonal toward Micah's king. 3 moves, Preston announced to the crowd, from ending this. He performed confidence for the room. Anyone want to order the kid a cab? He'll be leaving soon. Laughter moved through the guests. Near the back, Marissa held the edge of a doorway with both hands. Her lips moved in silent prayer. A waitress gently touched her shoulder and stayed beside her. Then Micah made his 3rd move, and for the first time, the room saw something it did not expect. He pushed a pawn on the edge of the board. A quiet little move. It appeared to do almost nothing, except it left another pawn undefended, directly in the path of Preston's queen. Free material. A gift. A guest familiar with chess groaned. Oh no, the kid just hung a pawn. He blundered. Preston saw it too. His grin widened. You see that, everyone? This is what happens when you let people sit at tables they don't belong at. His hand hovered above the queen. I almost feel bad taking it. Grant Ellison's eyes narrowed, only briefly. I saw the pawn. He also saw what waited behind it, under the table. Micah touched the worn wooden king again. The trap Pops had shown him on a rainy Saturday. The trap, built for bullies who chased lunch money. It was open. All it needed was an arrogant hand on a queen. Preston picked her up. The 4th move. The queen took the bait. Preston captured the undefended pawn and held it between 2 fingers like a trophy. 1 down, he said. The rest are coming. There was scattered applause. Someone whistled. What Preston did not notice was where his queen had landed. Deep inside enemy territory. Far from home. Surrounded by squares, controlled by a 14-year-old. Pops had explained traps this way. You don't catch a wolf by chasing it. You make it hungry. You leave meat where it can see it. Then another piece, farther in. Then another. The wolf thinks it's winning. It thinks it's the smartest animal in the valley. Right until it turns around and realizes how far it has walked, and sees the walls. Micah answered without hesitation. His 2nd knight developed quietly. Almost nobody in the ballroom understood what it was aiming at. Grant did. A square, several moves into the future. Inside Micah's mind, his grandfather's voice kept rhythm. Develop with a threat. Make every soldier earn his square. Let the big man eat. The 5th move came. Preston, feeling generous and invincible, captured another pawn. That pulled his queen even farther from her king. A general wandering away from his army to loot a farmhouse. The crowd loved it. 2 pawns ahead. The billionaire looked like he was winning. Glasses clinked in the back. If you measured only material, Preston was ahead. But chess is not won by collecting material. It is won by trapping one king. Micah's response made that clear. His dark squared bishop slid into the game and settled onto a diagonal aimed toward the white king. Now look at the pieces pointing toward Preston's side. 1 knight, another knight, a bishop, and Micah's queen still resting on her starting square, like a storm that had not yet decided when to break. Preston reached for his glass. It was empty. He signaled a waiter without looking away from the board. For perhaps the first time that evening, he was waiting for someone else. Then came the 6th move, and for the first time, Preston Carlyle had to think. Really think. He stared at the position. Somewhere behind his eyes, an old instinct from his college chess days woke up and began shouting. His queen was rich with stolen pawns, and completely alone. His knights were still undeveloped. His king remained in the center. Micah's pieces were already active. When had they all gotten there? They stood in a pattern Preston almost recognized. Something from an old book. Something with a warning attached. The room noticed his silence. The smirk remained on his face. but it no longer reached his eyes. He pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it against his forehead. "Taking your time, Preston?" A guest called the words lightly. The laugh that followed was thinner than before. Preston finally moved. He pulled his queen back one square, a small retreat disguised as repositioning. The first backward step of the game, Micah answered almost immediately. He castled his king to safety. The rook slid into place like a door locking shut. Everything tidy, everything connected. Near the spectators, a portfolio manager leaned toward Grant Ellison. "Grant, tell me straight. The kid's lucky, right?" Grant never took his eyes off the board. "Luck moves fast and thinks slow. That boy is doing the opposite." Grant paused. "I've seen this structure in master tournaments. The queen hunt, the quiet development, the patience. High isn't just defending. He's hunting. Hunting what? The most expensive piece on the board." That whisper traveled through the ballroom faster than champagne. Guests who had been laughing started speaking softly into their phones instead. The live stream climbed past 4,000 viewers. In Bridgeport, Harlem, dorm rooms, barber shops, and living rooms, strangers began watching a 14-year-old boy in second-hand sneakers stare across a chessboard at a billionaire. By the doorway, Marissa stopped praying. She studied her son's face, calm, unhurried, and suddenly she saw somebody else inside it. Her father's stillness, her father's eyes. Her hand rose slowly toward her mouth. All those Saturdays, all that light beneath Micah's bedroom door. She was not looking at a boy in trouble anymore. She was watching her father's final lesson become visible across a chessboard. Preston rolled his shoulders and forced the grin back into place. "Cute," he said. "You've got some moves. I'll give you that. Junior chess club at school." Then he leaned closer. "Enjoy it while it lasts, boy. Men like me don't lose to people like you. The world doesn't allow it." Micah looked up from the board. For the first time since he sat down, he met Preston's eyes and held them. "My grandfather used to say, 'The board doesn't ask your color, sir.'" Micah nodded toward the pieces. "It's your move." A phone in the crowd zoomed in on Preston's face. It caught a tiny flicker. Doubt. The first crack in years of certainty. That expression would later be replayed more than 11 million times. But the moment people would never stop talking about was still ahead. The seventh move changed the room. Micah reached for his first knight. The doorman. He placed it deep in white territory, right where one of Preston's pawns could capture it. Then Micah folded his hands and waited. The crowd gasped. Even people who barely understood chess recognized a free knight. "He's cracking," someone whispered. The pressure got him. Preston laughed out loud. Relief returned to his face. First the pawns, now this. "Thank you, boy." He captured the knight and dropped it beside the board with his other trophies. "Grant," Preston said, "you were saying something about hunting?" Grandmaster Grant Ellison stood up. A grandmaster does not stand during a casual party game without a reason. The strongest players in the room understood that first. They went quiet. The silence spread outward like ice across water. Grant studied the board. Then he spoke loudly enough for every phone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the record, that night was not a blunder. It was an invitation. And what you are watching now is a forced checkmate. Calculated, I suspect, from the boy's opening plan." For a moment, nobody breathed. Then the room flipped. Crowds do that sometimes, not gradually, all at once, like a sail catching wind from the opposite direction. The people who had laughed when Preston threw the $20 bill now pressed closer to the board. Phones first. The live stream surged past 40,000 viewers. Someone typed the question that spread everywhere. "Who is this kid?" The laughter was gone. In its place came the low electric sound of 200 people suddenly choosing a new favorite. A waiter set down his tray to watch. The celebrity chef walked out from the kitchen, still wearing his apron. Even the musicians stopped pretending to tune. Near the window stood Conrad Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Pension Partners. How was the largest single investor in Carlisle Capital. $800 million belonging to teachers and firefighters rested on Preston Carlisle's judgment. Conrad was not watching the board. I was watching Preston's hands. They had started trembling. Preston knew it. That was the hardest part. He could feel the room leaving him, the same room that had laughed on command for years. And the instinct that had built a $4 billion fund told him to do the one thing he always did when pressure arrived: raise the stakes. $2 million, Preston announced too loudly. Let's make it interesting. $2 million against anything. You scared, boy? The desperation embarrassed the room. A senator looked down at his shoes. Two women exchanged a glance over their champagne. Micah did not look away from the board. The bet stands, sir. $1 million. Then he paused. It's still your move. Behind the crowd, Marissa Bennett stood taller than she had in years. Across the board from her son, Preston Carlisle, looked down at a position quietly closing around his king like a fist. The checkmate was coming. Everybody could feel it. Preston searched the position for an escape. The ballroom waited. 200 guests. More than 46,000 people watching online. And one mother by the door. All of them watching a billionaire look for an exit that a grandmaster had already said did not exist. Preston tried anyway. He moved a knight back toward his king, a bodyguard arriving late to a fire. He released the piece as if it burned his fingers. And now finally Micah's queen moved. She had waited all game on her starting square. The storm that had not yet decided when to land. Micah lifted her gently. No slamming. Pops never allowed slamming. Then, he sent her across the board on one long diagonal into the heart of Preston's position. She settled onto the square, with a quiet click. Everyone heard it. Nobody else was making a sound. Check, Micah said. Look at Preston's king, trapped inside his own position. The escape squares were blocked not by enemy pieces, but by his own. His rook occupied a corner like furniture too heavy to move. His pawns formed a wall in front of him. The knight Preston had moved back blocked another path. Every guard Preston owned had become part of his prison. Only one legal move remained. Preston made it. He slid his king into the last open square, like a man backing into the final corner of a burning room. His hand trembled badly enough that the piece rocked when he let go. Then came move 9. The entire ballroom seemed to lean toward the table. Chandelier light flashed across the edge of the board. In the silence, you could hear ice melting inside abandoned glasses. Phones adjusting focus. The shallow breathing of a man who had bet $1 million on his own superiority. Micah needed almost no time. His remaining knight lifted. It jumped over the wall of pawns. The L that thinks like a knife, and landed on the one square from which no answer remained. Checkmate, Micah said. Not loudly. Not triumphantly. He said it the way Pops had always said it at the stone tables. Softly. Almost kindly. The way you tell someone news they should have seen coming. 9 moves. A smothered mate. One of the oldest and most elegant traps in chess. Aching trapped by his own army. Grant Ellison would later explain the sequence to reporters. The offered pawns that pulled the queen away. The knight sacrifice that forced the position closed. The quiet development that aimed every black piece toward the final square. 9 moves, built like 9 sentences in one complete argument. Then Micah reached into his pocket. He brought out the small wooden king, its crown worn smooth by decades beneath an old man's thumb and years beneath a boy's. Micah placed it gently beside the board, facing the defeated position. This is for the man who taught me, he said. He played at stone tables in a park his whole life for $5 a game. How was better than everyone in this room. Almost nobody ever knew his name. The room fell completely silent. Then one pair of hands began to clap. Slow. Deliberate. Each sound ringing against the marble. Grandmaster Grant Ellison. A moment later, the room erupted. Waiters. Senators. Fund managers. Guests in evening gowns. And thousands upon thousands of people online. One word flooded the live stream again and again. King, king, king. Marissa crossed the same floor she had cleaned for years. Nobody tried to stop her. She reached her son, took his face in both hands, and pressed her forehead against his. The cameras caught that too, and Preston Carlisle stayed in his chair, alone in the center of the applause, staring down at his $50,000 chessboard. At a white king smothered by its own pieces, on a battlefield where, for the first time in Preston's life, his money had meant absolutely nothing. The applause was still moving through the room when Preston found his voice. All right, all right. He stood and straightened his jacket. He reached for his old grin, the way a man checks empty pockets for lost keys. Fun's over, everyone. Great party trick. The kid was coached, obviously, but cute, very cute. The applause stopped. The room watched him. The bet? Preston waved one hand. Come on, be serious. Nobody hands $1 million to the housekeeper's kid over a board game. It was a joke. Everybody knew it was a joke. Nobody laughed. That's the thing about rooms like that. They can smell weakness. Many of the people in that ballroom had built fortunes by recognizing it. Grant Ellison spoke first. His voice had the dry calm of a man reading a verdict. You stated the terms yourself, Preston. Clearly. For everyone here, $1 million. Witnessed by 200 guests. Recorded on dozens of phones. And broadcast live. Grant glanced toward the crowd. How many people are watching now? Someone called out the number. 61,000. The figure landed on Preston like a falling beam. Grant folded his hands. You can honor the bet. Or tens of thousands of people can watch the manager of a $4 billion fund explain that his word means nothing. The moment keeping it becomes expensive. In your business, Preston, which costs more? Before Preston could answer, Conrad Whitmore stepped forward. The room shifted around him. $800 million, Preston, he said quietly. That's how much my pensioners have riding on your judgment. Tonight, I watched that judgment up close. You picked a fight with a child because you wanted to feel taller. You walked directly into a trap a grandmaster says was planned from the beginning. And when you lost, your first instinct was to avoid your own promise. Conrad buttoned his coat. My office will be calling yours. The color drained from Preston's face in front of every camera. He grabbed for the only solution he understood. Grant, be reasonable. We'll handle this privately. My attorneys can draft something. A scholarship, maybe. A gesture. The word you're looking for, Grant said, is payment. Then, Marissa Bennett did something she had never done in all her years working for Preston Carlisle. She stepped forward and spoke without waiting to be invited. Mr. Carlisle, I cleaned your house for years. You charged me for a glass. One of your guests broke. You called me the help so often that sometimes I wondered if you ever learned my name. Her voice did not shake. It's Marissa Bennett. And that young man is Micah Solomon Bennett. We were never beneath you, sir. You just needed us to be. Someone in the crowd started to clap. Grant lifted one hand. Not yet. The room understood. Micah was not finished. He stood from the table. Then he walked toward the $20 bill, still lying on the marble. It had remained there through the entire game. Nobody had dared touch it. Micah picked it up. He smoothed it flat. Then he placed it gently on the chessboard, beside Preston's trapped white king. Keep it, sir, Micah said. You're going to need it more than I will. I was not smiling. I was not angry either. His voice sounded like the board itself. Patient, level, final. The clip of that moment would become one of the most replayed pieces of the entire story. The bill, the king, the boy's steady voice, and Preston Carlisle, standing beneath his own chandelier, surrounded by guests who suddenly could not meet his eyes. A man completely alone inside the house that had seemed to belong to him in every possible way. The guests left earlier than Preston had planned. The valet line outside was unusually quiet. Online, the video kept spreading. The audience passed 100,000 and kept climbing. The name Micah Bennett climbed. The name Preston Carlisle fell. The video eventually passed 4 million views, then 14 million. The internet gave Preston a nickname, the 9-move billionaire. It followed him onto financial television, into the group chats of his own employees. Across trading floors, one business network played the checkmate beside a chart showing the returns of his fund. The host barely needed to speak. One raised eyebrow said enough. Micah returned to school as if life could somehow continue normally. His mother insisted. It did not work. Students he had barely spoken to stood in hallways with phones raised. One teacher asked him to sign a chessboard. Reporters gathered outside the school. Television programs called. Through all of it, Micah gave only one short interview. A local reporter stood beside him and his mother and asked how it felt to humiliate a billionaire. Micah shook his head. "I didn't humiliate anybody. The position did. He just couldn't hear it warning him." Not long after the party, Whitmore Pension Partners filed notice that it was withdrawing its full investment, $800 million. Then, 3 more institutional investors followed. Because in Preston Carlisle's business, judgment was the product, and the world had just watched his judgment lose to a 14-year-old boy in 9 moves, then watched him try to escape the bill. The wager itself never reached a courtroom. It did not need to. Preston's own attorneys explained the situation. The wager had been stated clearly. 200 witnesses heard it. Dozens of recordings captured it. A grandmaster had formally asked Preston to state the terms on camera. Fighting payment would create endless headlines. Paying would create one. Preston paid. The check arrived at Marissa and Micah's small apartment in Bridgeport. Marissa held it in both hands for a long time. Then she sat at the kitchen table beneath the framed note about her son's remarkable mind, and she cried. Not the way someone cries over sudden money. The way someone cries when something heavy has finally ended. She never cleaned another wealthy family's house. As for Carlyle Capital, it did not survive what followed. Investor withdrawals became a run. The run became a fire sale. Eventually, the $4 billion fund was wound down by attorneys who billed by the hour and did not laugh at Preston's jokes. Preston kept the mansion, barely. He sold paintings. He sold cars. The $50,000 chessboard went to auction. An anonymous bidder bought it for far less than Preston had paid, then donated it to a public school chess club in Harlem. Nobody ever proved who the bidder was. But whenever reporters asked Grant Ellison about it, the Grandmaster smiled in a way that suggested he knew more than he planned to say. And Micah? Later, at 15 years old, wearing a blazer slightly too large for his thin frame, he stood on a stage holding a state youth championship trophy above his head. It was his first real season in official tournament chess. I had not lost a rated game. In the front row, Grant Ellison applauded. The way he had applauded in that ballroom. First, and longer than anyone else. The training that followed looked nothing like a movie. Grant did not teach Micah clever tricks. The boy already had plenty. I taught him patience under tournament clocks. Openings deep enough to survive experienced masters. Endgames. Preparation. And something even more important. How to lose. Because in serious chess, unlike Preston Carlisle's ballroom, everybody loses eventually. Micah absorbed it the way he absorbed almost everything. Quietly. Completely. Faster than expected. Grant had taken him on as a student after the party, not as charity. Grant made that clear every time a reporter suggested it. "I've coached prodigies for decades," he told one interviewer. "Talent is common. What that young man has is rarer. I thinks in complete plans." His grandfather built that mind one Saturday at a time, at a stone table in a public park. The chess world owes that man a debt it never paid. Micah found a way to begin paying it. Most of the $1 million went into something called the Reed Foundation. Named for Solomon Reed, a hotel doorman the chess world never knew. The foundation pays for chessboards, coaches, transportation, and tournament entry fees for children from working neighborhoods. The entry fees matter, because talent was never what Micah's family lacked. Money for the ticket was. One of the foundation's first major projects placed 12 new stone chess tables in Marcus Garvey Park. They were arranged around the old tables. A small bronze plaque carried a simple message. "For Pops. The board never lies." Marissa runs the foundation. She turned out to be extraordinarily good at it. Years of managing a billionaire's household had taught her logistics. A lifetime of being underestimated had taught her exactly which children to notice. She recognizes their faces immediately. They look like her son. They look like her father. Marissa's final act as Preston Carlisle's housekeeper was short. She returned to the estate one last time. She placed her keys on the marble counter. Beside them, she left a single line on a note. "We quit. The help." On Saturdays, Micah still travels to Harlem and teaches at the stone tables himself. One 6-year-old girl with butterfly clips in her hair once sat across from him. Micah arranged the pieces one by one, touching each soldier before the battle. Then he picked up a knight and held it where she could see. "This one's my favorite," he told her. "It moves like an L and thinks like a knife." The girl grinned. Somewhere, you have to believe, an old hotel doorman would have grinned too. Pops used to say that the board was the fairest place he had ever found. His grandson is busy building more of those places. And the worn wooden king with the smooth crown, it does not sit behind glass. It rides in Micah's pocket. To tournaments, to parks, to the stone tables. Some inheritances are worth more than $1 million. And Preston Carlisle, the last anyone heard, he was doing consulting work, which, on Wall Street, sometimes means the phone does not ring the way it used to. People who visited his much quieter mansion said the study had been stripped nearly bare. Almost everything was gone. Except one thing Preston refused to throw away. A $20 bill framed behind glass. Whether he keeps it as a wound or a lesson, only Preston knows. And maybe that is where the real meaning of this story begins. Somewhere, right now, there is a child being underestimated by someone with more money, more status, or a louder voice. Maybe that child is yours. Maybe that child was once you. Maybe the hidden gift isn't chess at all. Maybe it's music, numbers, machines, words, painting, leadership, patience, the ability to understand something everyone else overlooks. Micah's grandfather understood something simple and powerful. The board did not care about Preston's mansion. It did not care about Marissa's uniform. It did not care about the price of the pieces, the size of a bank account, or who was used to being obeyed. It waited for the next move. That is why Micah never needed to shout. I did not need to become cruel, simply because Preston was cruel to him. I did not have to answer humiliation with humiliation. I trusted what he had learned. I trusted the work nobody had seen. And when his moment came, he allowed the truth to speak for itself. That doesn't mean Preston escaped responsibility. Choices have consequences. The words he used mattered. The way he treated Marissa mattered. The bet he made mattered. The attempt to break his promise mattered. And the people who had trusted his judgment had every right to reconsider that trust. But Micah's greatest victory was not destroying Preston. It was refusing to become him. He won the game. He protected his mother's dignity. He honored his grandfather. Then he used the money to build tables for children who might otherwise never get a chance to show what they could do. That is a different kind of victory. One that keeps moving after the applause is gone. Marissa's story matters too. For years, she swallowed insults because she was trying to protect her son and keep a roof over their heads. That was not weakness. It was responsibility under pressure. And when the moment finally came to stand tall, she did not need a speech filled with anger. She simply said her name, Marissa Bennett. Sometimes dignity is that quiet. Grant Ellison also made a choice. He could have watched the game like everyone else. Instead, he made the terms clear. He protected fairness. Later, he gave Micah guidance without treating him like a charity case. I saw talent and respected the person carrying it. That's what good mentors do. And even Preston's ending leaves room for one question. Why did he keep that $20 bill? Maybe pride never completely left him. Maybe regret finally found a way in. Maybe the object that once represented contempt became the one thing he could not look at without remembering the cost of judging another person too quickly. We don't know, and perhaps we don't need to. People can face consequences and still have the possibility of learning. Accountability and compassion do not have to be enemies. Forgiveness does not mean pretending the harm never happened. It means refusing to let someone else's worst choice decide what kind of person you become. So remember, Micah's grandfather. The board doesn't ask. It simply waits for your move. And life gives us those moves every day. How we speak to someone who cannot help us. Whether we notice the quiet child in the corner. Whether we laugh with the crowd or step away from it. Whether we keep our word when keeping it becomes expensive. Whether we use success only to rise above people, or to pull a chair out for someone who has never been invited to the table. Those choices reveal more about us than any title ever will. So here's my question for you. What hidden talent is somebody in your life carrying quietly? Yours? Your child's? Your mother's? Your father's? Your grandfather's? Who is being overlooked because the world has not yet learned how to see them? Tell their story in the comments. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that being underestimated does not mean being without value. Sometimes the world laughs before it understands. Sometimes it judges before it looks closely. And sometimes the quietest person in the room has already seen 9 moves farther than everyone else. If you want more stories about people the world counted out, right up until the moment it had to count on them, subscribe and stay with us. Until next time, keep learning, keep your word. Treat people with dignity before you know what they can do for you. And when your moment comes, you don't always have to shout. Sometimes you can simply let the board speak.